Some brief notes about self-care as we wrap up the day.
Thanks so much, Steve. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Chard, and I run all of the post-traumatic stress disorder programs for the Cincinnati VA Medical Center, which is actually in Fort Thomas, Kentucky. But I also run the PTSD program at the University of Cincinnati, and that is where we treat a great number of first responders. At this point, we're treating about 30% first responders at our clinic at the university. And what we're finding is that first responders have very similar needs to those of our veterans. And in fact, as you're going to see in a minute, the PTSD rates are actually as high, if not higher, in some first responder groups. So again, feel free to jump in. If you have any questions, just shout out or throw up a chat. Be happy to answer it that way. But I wanted to talk for a few minutes about why. Why are we seeing this? What is this stress about? What is PTSD? How is it different than stress? And so what I want to talk about first is just general stress, because there is a difference between stress and PTSD. And obviously, first responders have a lot of causes of stress. And some of the biggest ones are change and uncertainty. And there are expressions in our society about people don't like change. And that's actually false. People who don't like change don't like change. But people who like change thrive on it and do well with it. And one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of first responders actually like change. And they create a lot of change and they have a lot of change. But maybe at home, every single one of their shirts is in order, right? And so they try to control that change and have that control in other aspects because they do know how much of their life is change and uncertainty when they go to work. Another form of stress, though, is lack of control. And you're going to see me come back to that several times because there are a lot of ways that we can have control in our lives and a lot of ways that we don't. And then, of course, pressure. And pressure can come from all sides. So let's take that into meaning then. What are some of the risk factors for first responders for high stress and high pressure and high uncertainty? Well, one of the big ones is being unmarried. It's actually better for males to be married. Now, for all my gals out there, it's actually better for women to be single. And so there's a lot of research out there that show men just do better partnered and women actually do better single because women tend to be caretakers. And so they add on caretaking for their mate in addition to all of their job stress. So that's one thing to think about. One thing that I also talk about, and I know Steve can talk about this a lot from his own experience. How many times have I met with a first responder who says, let me just get to captain, let me just get to sergeant, let me just get to, because they think rank is going to give them power and control. And what they quickly learn is there's always someone above you who's still going to be giving you orders. But the more you move up, the more people that are underneath you still complaining that things aren't being done. And so now you're getting it from both sides and you just add on the number of people that complain to you. So rank isn't always the answer. Rank is not always the way to reduce stress, although a lot of people think it is. But there's some other key things just on this slide that I want to highlight about stress that I want you to think about as we go forward and think about your own events. You know, we know that not all traumatic events cause a traumatic reaction within the person. Not all traumatic events lead to PTSD. In fact, only 30% of all traumatic events lead to PTSD. But why do some events do and some events don't? Well, we know some key things. The closer one is to a traumatic event that involves death or severe harming of someone, the more likely you are to have post-traumatic stress reaction. We also know that the more likely you are to feel fear or horror during an event, instead of that kind of dispatched, numb, or just doing my job kind of feeling, the more likely you are to have a traumatic reaction. But also we know that when you start having holes in the memory, when maybe you went in on a run and you remember walking in the building to the first floor and maybe you getting to the stairs and you don't even remember getting upstairs to the baby's bedroom, grabbing the baby, and the next thing you know, you were running out of the house with the baby in your arms. That's called peri-traumatic, during the trauma, peri-traumatic dissociation. And we know that not everyone who's got holes in their memory has PTSD, but it is a signal that there may be something going on that your brain wasn't able to kind of process that event at the time. And so these are some of the things that I begin looking for whenever I talk to first responders about, let's see how much your traumas, whether they're work traumas or even child traumas, have impacted you today. And then, of course, starting at a younger job, the younger we are, the harder it is. And that's because of brain development, which I'm going to come back to in just a minute. But we know there are other stressors: personality style, temperament, health issues. One of the things like I like to talk to people a lot about is you all hear about things like type A and type B. I mean, a lot of this is just pop psychology, but some of it's actually based in real psychology. We do know that some people run at a different RPM. We do know that some people are more perfectionistic, but we also know that there are some people that just don't like anything unsettled. And we can see temperament as soon as babies are born even. And you can have two babies born to the same family and have one be very low key, can handle anything, any noise, they can sleep through it. And the next baby's the most sensitive thing on the planet. There's nothing wrong with either one of them. It's just temperament, and that's hardwired. The problem is the more sensitive you are as a person, the less likely you are to handle trauma and change well. And so I think it's really important to think about, are you that guy that always wants to have the same meal on Friday night? Do you have that same chair you always want to sit in? Well, do you always drive home the same way? Are there some things that you can change? Because actually those are actually healthy for you at preventing a stress reaction, right? So stress related to the job, there's actually been some pretty solid research on what about first responder jobs are most stressful. And of course, line of duty deaths are incredibly difficult, whether they are something that you responded to, a civilian, or actually having a colleague who dies. But giving death notifications, even being out on the highway and knowing a guy is not going to make it and having family and friends there, maybe who are in the same vehicle, and even though you're not calling it right then and you're pushing them back, you pretty much know, and they pretty much know, that this person isn't going to make it. Just dealing with that family at that moment, as many of you know, is incredibly stressful, right? And actually there's research even going back to Vietnam, when our soldiers from Vietnam would be asked to go and give death notices. And they would say it wasn't Vietnam that was the hardest. It was actually giving the death notices to the family after there was some type of incident and their loved one was killed, right? Those are very stressful. Lawsuits are incredibly stressful. We now have cameras on everyone, everywhere. Always stressful to have anyone looking over your eye. And the joke that I make about this all the time is, how many surgeons actually have cameras in the OR? And the only time they do is if they're trying to show off or show a skill or show an ability to students or to colleagues or for some type of training video. If you actually put that kind of pressure on my OR surgeon every single day, I think it would be very career impacting, because it's very hard to have someone watch everything you do at every minute, right? And so that leads to a lot of stress, and we can't ignore the impact that it has on us. And then of course, fatigue and shift work, that's old news. We all know shift work is bad for people, and it is part of what you do and part of what causes stress. We just at least have to acknowledge it. And then of course, change. Your job is change. You never know what you're going to get when you go out on a given day. All of that causing stress, right? So then moving on, in terms of other types of stress, we know there are administrative stressors. We know that sometimes people feel like they don't get enough support. That can become administration, can be the city, that can be civilians, that can be whoever's voting on whether you all get a pay raise. There are a whole lot of organizational stressors that can really impact people and cause problems. But I also want to highlight the need for administration to be really clear. One police force I was asked to go in and work with noted that they tended to have the chief send a message out to all of his lieutenants, and then they would all pass it down through rank. But there was a problem. Is it was not handed out in writing. And so however it was written down by the lieutenant, each lieutenant wrote down a different message and dispelled a different message or dispatched a different message out. That miscommunication and lack of clarity meant that, every single one of those officers was receiving a different message from the chief than what the chief had indicated. And so we talked about, if it's coming from the chief, is there a way for the chief to be precise in maybe sending out a communique so that everyone got the message in the same way, instead of getting kind of this dispersed communication, right? And being able to have that reduces conflict and reduces problems, right? And then having input, of course. Now, in terms of other stressors, we know the criminal justice system, folks get called to testify. Even I do that regarding PTSD cases. It's extremely stressful having an attorney barking at you and trying to win a case one way or the other. And then, of course, society at large is a massive stressor I have to highlight. But I always also like to include that the media and entertainment industry. I jokingly like to say there's maybe one movie I've seen where psychologists were actually portrayed correctly. And I'd like you to think about, in your industry, let's see how many movies about fire and rescue have you seen, or TV shows that were actually right 100% of the time, right? Even though they have this consultant expert from the fire service who's supposed to get it right. And that's part of the thing, is they're trying to make a fun, exciting story. It's not about necessarily getting it right. But that creates a lot of confusion to the press. And I mean, I still get people who call me and say, I know that they can get the data on genetics within about 3 hours because, you know what, I watched that CSI show and I know how quickly they can get that in the lab. Like, that is not reality, ma'am. You know, and just being able to have people understand media, entertainment, even some of our news shows are not based on reality, because that becomes a stressor for everything that you do, right? And then, of course, family and life and health concerns and all of that go on. So I just painted the picture of where all stress is coming from, but what does it do to you? Well, we know that if you leave stress alone and do nothing with it, we see huge increases in people with having heart problems, heart attacks, hypertension, which leads to stroke. We actually see higher rates of cancer in people with more stress. You don't have the ability, even at the cell level, to fight off the cancer-causing agents. And so we see higher levels of cancer, all of the stomach and heart stuff. So think, draw a line from here down to your stomach. Ulcers, diabetes, cystitis, colitis, all those things that tear up your gut, headaches, every bit of it runs up and down. We can tend to see people having asthma, problems breathing, literally just from stress. And then you start seeing things like overeating and obesity, being tired. One of the things I always like to point out is when you start getting that twitch in the corner of your eye or right here, yeah, it can mean you're tired, but it can also mean you're stressed. And so being really mindful, if you start getting a little twitchy, am I a little bit stressed right now? What do I need to do to calm myself down? And then as, of course, it gets worse, we see things like anxiety disorders, depression, and even post-traumatic stress, which I'm going to come back to in a second. Now, this is what it was looking physically. What does that behaviorally look like in people? Well, we tend to see people who have more stress make more mistakes. They become more accident prone. They get more angry, get in more arguments, tend to blame others for their problems. That's when we see people using more drugs and alcohol to manage it. I see when folks finally get to my clinic, it's not uncommon for me to have guys saying, yeah, 4 or 5 beers a night to get to sleep. That's normal for me, right? We see actual violence go up, though, as people get more stressed. Even domestic violence at home goes up. Irritability. I'll see people start biting their quicks of their nails and biting their nails more, and then just withdrawing. So they may end up focusing too much on work, so much that they don't socialize, or withdrawing from friends and family completely and not being around, right? So when I get talked to command, and command always says, what do I look for? Okay, how do I know if one of my guys isn't doing well? I always say behavior change that can't otherwise be explained, right? Having a new baby causes behavior change. Getting married causes behavior change. But when you see behavior change in any of your employees that you cannot explain with another reason, be mindful, right? Because what happens? What we start to see is burnout, right? Lack of enthusiasm and interest, decreased job performance, temper flare-ups, loss of will and motivation. You know, as Steve mentioned, he and I went out and did a lot of these talks to all sorts of first responders across kind of the middle and southern part of Ohio. And when we would sit there at break and listen to the guys talking, you know, what you would hear guys chatting about is, oh man, don't want to go to work on Monday, or crap, it's rainy out, all the idiots are going to be on the road, you know. And there was a lot of just kind of this not happy with what I have to do as part of my job, and just this kind of uninterested, lack of motivation, lack of commitment. You know, I can't believe what all these idiots are going to do out there. And one of the things I like to remind people of is you have to remember why you started in the job, right? So I work with PTSD. All I hear about all day, every day is people's trauma. I can't come into work on Monday going, oh man, another dog fight, another this, another that I have to listen to today. I'm not going to be a good therapist, right? What we have to focus on is why we did this in the first place. And that can be hard to remember sometimes. And so I like to jokingly talk about the fact that I have a 10-year-old at home who wants to be actually a police officer at this point in time. But he's not going around saying, I want to be a police officer because I hate all the stupid people out there that I'm going to have to deal with. What does he say? He says, I want to arrest the bad guys, I want to protect the good people, and I want to protect mama, right? That's what he wants to do, and drive a fast car. I don't want to ignore that. right? And so we have to remember, why did we want to become a firefighter in the first place? Why a medic? Why EMT? Why? Because if you can remind yourself of that when you go into shift, it changes burnout and stress, right? And it helps to prevent some of this from happening. Because if left alone, the worst case is the alcoholism and substance use. The higher rates of divorce, without a doubt, we already know exist within the fire service and other first responders, but then PTSD, depression, and suicide. And I'll be completely honest, the reason I got into this area with first responders is we've done amazing work with veterans. We actually now know that if we give good quality care to veterans, we don't see the suicides. And I'm going to knock on wood right now, but in 16 years that I've run this program, we haven't had a single suicide of a veteran in Cincinnati, Ohio, in the PTSD program. So we know when we get to people to good care, we don't see the same issues. And so when I see these suicide rates in our first responders going up and up and up in our region, it worries me. And so I want to be there to say to you all, there are things that you can do. This is a normal disorder to get, but it's also something that we can treat, right? So with that said, I want to talk about PTSD. PTSD is something that affects about 8% of the United States population, right? More women than men, but that's because you're more likely to get PTSD from interpersonal violence. So sexual abuse, assault, you're more likely than combat. When we look at men and women in combat, they have the same rates of PTSD. When we look at men and women who've been abused as children, same rates of PTSD. So it's due to the type of trauma. Women are more likely to be molested, so they're more likely to have PTSD, right? But when you look at the type of trauma, it's equal. So when we look at combat vets, it ranges. It's anywhere from 20 to 30% of people who had combat experience. That depends on where they were deployed, how many times where they were deployed, and what they did. But let's do a comparison. So when we look at firefighters, when we look at emergency management of any kind, and we look at police officers, you're seeing rates as high, if not higher, than combat veterans. And I want to point out that combat veterans get to come home, and firefighters go home for one night, but their job is the trauma source, unlike a foreign country being the trauma source for a veteran. And so we see some significant differences in our first responders that I really think we need to be paying attention to. So what gives people PTSD? It's not a bad fight with your girlfriend, unless she pulls a knife. It's not a divorce, again, unless she pulls a knife. But we know that severe events are what causes PTSD. So things that you all tend to deal with on sometimes a weekly basis, I hate to say daily, but fires, natural disasters, hostages, crashes of any kind, all of these can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, okay? And what that literally means is this. These are the symptoms that I'm showing you right now. It's having the disorder and then having the thoughts intrude and come back, not go away. As I talked to a firefighter friend of mine not that long ago, he said, you know, Kate, I woke up with this same kid every day. And it took me a minute looking at him. He said it took me 3 years to stop waking up with him. And it was a child that he could not save in a fire. And, you know, his point being, obviously, that every single day when he would wake up, this child would be with him and zen with him. And he just couldn't shake it until it took a solid 3 years for it to move on. Another symptom is avoidance. People start avoiding things, situations, people, places that'll remind them of the trauma. You know, if somebody's going to ask them about it, I'm just not going to go out tonight. Oh, there's the street where that happened. I'm going to avoid that street. Right? So some of the change that we see there in avoidance. But one of the hardest is that we see is the change in thoughts and moods. So people start having really negative views of the world, maybe even of themselves, maybe of civilians. You know, they have change in mood. They start saying, you know what? I'm not happy anymore. I'm kind of numb. Or you know what? I'm just kind of irritated most of the time. It's hard for me to remember how to feel love and happiness other than maybe towards one or two people. And then we start to see people who are on alert. They tend to be overreactive in terms of their system. They're just on alert all the time and can't calm down. Tend to be a little bit jumpy. We used to joke about the Vietnam veteran who you say, don't shake Uncle Ed. He's on the couch having his nap. Why don't shake him? Because he comes up swinging. Well, that's PTSD. When someone is that reactive, even when they're asleep, that's a concern that we want to look at and be aware if they're okay, right? And so this right here is what the disorder is. And this is what we look at when someone comes into us and we want to discuss, do you have PTSD or do you not? But I want to highlight that because so many people don't come in for PTSD help, by the time I get a hold of them, they usually have at least one other disorder. So we start seeing people with anxiety and depression, personality issues, sleep disorders, all of this before they finally make it to me, right? So who gets it? Well, unfortunately, it's somewhat genetically based. So if mom or dad have depression or anxiety or PTSD, then their kids are. Temperament, those people that are more sensitive, those people that are more unable to cope with change and flex are more likely to get it. But we also know environments that are more blaming of the individual are more likely to have PTSD. We also know that the younger you are, the worse it is. The more trauma you experience, the worse it is. The less predictable it was, the worse it is. And the trust in the perpetrator. So like when you actually believe that someone's going to do the right thing and they don't, the worse it is. But the biggest thing I want to highlight is PTSD is most definitely controlled by perceived social support. And if I've got anyone at all in leadership on here, this is the number one thing to hear. We know more people develop PTSD when they do not perceive social support after an event. And there used to be these operational stress debriefings, these after incident debriefings, and all this great stuff the Navy used to do and the Red Cross used to do them. We even used to do them for bank robberies. And what we found is they actually were linked to causing more PTSD. Because in an attempt to say who did what to who to how, where did we miss something, what could we do differently? At least one guy or gal was sitting over there thinking, they're saying it's my fault. And we know that perception, that idea, my own perception, not what you intended to do, but my perception of social support after the trauma is the biggest predictor of who gets it and who doesn't. And I'll tell you, we did a study at 2 firehouses, one in Kentucky and one out in Texas. And the number one predictor of who got PTSD after a traumatic event was the leadership style of the fire chief. Number one predictor of who got it, taking out everything else. So we do know that giving people that sense of social support, and again, I'm not talking about hugging and kissing and singing Kumbaya. Social support's very individualized, right? It's what you need. You know, after a bad, crappy day, I might need a 5-mile run and you might need Netflix and 3 beers. Now, I'm not signing on to the 3 beers because I don't want you drinking to handle stress. But the point being is being able to support each other in a way that you want to be supported is absolutely critical to help people get over stressful events, right? And so being able to know your colleagues, your friends, the folks in your command about what do they each individually like and need after a really crappy day has gone down changes the ballgame. We can really stop PTSD from happening by just giving people what they need after something bad happens, right? Make sense? And if you have questions, again, just jump in on me since I can't see when I've got the slides going. So I want to not kill you with biology. I don't want to give this a big, long biology lecture, but I did want to give at least a minute on the fact that PTSD is a biological disorder. That's your brain. And if you look at my slide, the amygdala is this little thing right here. It's the oldest part of our brain, and it controls fight, flight, and freeze. And all the signals from your senses, your smell, your sight, your touch, all go straight to the amygdala. There's 500 pathways to here. And when the amygdala fires, it sends a signal down your brainstem to change respiration, get blood flow to the brain and the lungs, stop digestion. And all of this happens and you fight, you flight, or you freeze. None of this involves any conscious thought or thought at all. It's all controlled by the amygdala to make sure you stay alive. Only after that system is invoked does the amygdala send a signal up to the front of your brain, which is literally what's different between us and a monkey. Ours is bigger. And this medial prefrontal cortex is what then comes online and says, now do what? And the issue with PTSD is right here. So when you have a threat come in, the amygdala fires, does its job down to the brainstem, saying everything it's supposed to do, and the signal goes up to the prefrontal cortex. That's how we handle things. And if we're out having a hike and we see a squiggly stick and it looks like a snake, we're going to either jump back or we're going to kill it, or hopefully not freeze, maybe if it's a copperhead. And we're going to do all of these things, and then the prefrontal cortex is going to tell the amygdala to calm down. Everything's good. And we're going to go about our hike. It'll be fine, right? Now, that's great. That's normal, and that's what we all should do. And that's what you do every time you go out on a run where there's a possible trauma. The problem is post-traumatic stress disorder. In PTSD, we have a trigger, something, a sight, a sound, a smell, a memory that reminds us of the trauma, hits the amygdala, and we see a massive signal go down the brainstem. All of a sudden, you're acting as if it's happening right then, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning. That signal goes from the brainstem up to the prefrontal cortex, and in PTSD, folks, it's blacked out. We now know that we have a lower functioning prefrontal cortex in people with PTSD. And I've got brain scans from folks just like you to prove it. PTSD and having this disorder actually impairs the functioning of the prefrontal cortex. And so what happens is the amygdala is on high alert. It goes on over alert. We actually call it an amygdala hijacking. So you're having senses sending in information all the time. Your amygdala is overreacting and your prefrontal cortex doesn't know how to say, it's a stick, calm down. In the mind of the body, it's a squiggly snake and it's about to eat you for lunch and you just can't calm down. And it takes about 4 hours to calm that system down when you don't have a prefrontal cortex doing it for you. Okay, that's PTSD in a nutshell. My job is quite literally to get the prefrontal cortex working again and to calm the amygdala down, right? So I always talk about this because we talk about divorce rates in first responders. So what's the impact on the spouse? We know that when there's PTSD in a couple, we know that 70% of the couples report distress compared to 30% of non-PTSD couples. We know that the wives and partners of people with PTSD have higher rates of depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, and even anxiety. There's even, it says veteran, but it's also first responders, more violence from the veteran, more violence within the relationship, smacking each other, things like that. Lower levels of happiness, higher levels of distress, and even secondary trauma for the other partner. And then this slide is even sadder for me. In terms of children, the impact of PTSD on kids is unbelievably massive. Children of our first responders, our veterans who have PTSD, have higher rates of learning disabilities. They have more conduct disorders and aggression. They have higher rates of attention deficit disorder. Almost 25% increase in a need for some psychological psychiatric care. They are less able to manage social situations and have a lower emotional connection to their parents. PTSD does a number on the entire system, and it's really sad to see what it does. So what do we do about it? Can we treat it? Absolutely. Absolutely. There are medications, and I always start with this because medications are not the first thing we want to go to. But when a lot of people have mental health disorders, they go to their primary care doctor, their internal medicine doctor. And 90% of all mental health drugs are actually being prescribed by primary care doctors. This is not the first line of treatment for PTSD, but unfortunately, a lot of folks get put on them. Folks refer to my clinic all the time who say, oh yeah, I'm on that Zoloft, or I'm on Prozac, I'm on fluoxetine. They're okay. Not one of these has been found to treat PTSD. In a worst case, they come to me on benzodiazepines, Ativan, Xanax, Valium. That's bad news because what these do is they actually control the amygdala. They calm the amygdala down, and that in theory sounds great, but the problem is they're incredibly addictive and habit forming, and the tolerance becomes an issue. So you need a higher and higher dose. And I can't get the prefrontal cortex to activate and do its job when you've got a benzo doing it for you. So we actually tell people we need to titrate them off the benzo to actually be really effective in therapy. Because what we do know is therapy is the best way. And I want to be clear, it's not talk therapy. There are a ton of people holding shingles out there saying, I know all about first responders, we'll do talk therapy. If they don't give you homework, it's not evidence-based treatment. And you say, well, what's evidence-based treatment, doc? Well, if you go in tomorrow for a knee replacement, do you want the knee that they were using 10 years ago on my mother? No. That thing gives out in about 6 years. You want the brand new titanium knee that they're using that's slated now to last about 40 years, right? So we want to use the thing that evidence shows is the best. Talk therapy has not been found to be effective at all for PTSD. Every treatment that we have for PTSD involves some type of homework at this point. Right? And so what we want to talk about is using the highly recommended evidence-based treatments, prolonged exposure, EMDR, and cognitive processing therapy. These are the ones endorsed by all of the medical and mental health guidelines, literally across the world, not just the United States. So what do they look like? Well, prolonged exposure is about 8 to 15 sessions. It's about 90 minutes long. This one actually requires you to retell the story. And a lot of people go, you got to be kidding me. a lot of people want to get it off their chest. I can't tell you how many vets, how many police, how many fire and rescue coming in and says, I just want to tell somebody what happened other than my wife. And being able to tell that story sometimes is what you need in order to feel better. And this therapy allows for that. EMDR is a version somewhat of broad exposure in that it has you do that in your own head. You don't actually have to tell the therapist what you're thinking about. The other therapy that I'm actually a co-author of is cognitive processing therapy. And in this therapy, we take a completely different tact. In this one, we actually have you focus on the prefrontal cortex and focus more on what the trauma has done to you, not what happened. And so you don't have to go into great detail about what happened in this therapy. And there's a couples-based version of this as well, in case there's a battle buddy or significant other partner that you want to involve. Okay. So just a couple more here and we can take a break. So how do we stop it? How do we reduce it? As I mentioned, the manager has a wonderful potential role to play here. Staying in touch with subordinates, noticing behavior change, recognizing symptoms of stress, being really mindful of operational stress debriefings and how you're doing them and who you're doing them and are they being done the right way. You know, providing counseling if needed. I can't tell you how many Saturdays I've had in my last 15 years where I didn't get a call from a lieutenant or a chief saying, Dr. Chard, I've got a guy, we've admitted into XYZ hospital, or he's at home with us, or we went out drinking last night. How soon can we get him into one of your clinics? And now that we do video teletherapy, we can obviously reach anywhere, any corner in the state of Ohio quite easily, right? So walking the talk. For those of you who are aware of the military, one of the biggest shifts in the military mental health is when some generals came forward and said, I have PTSD and I've gone to get help. You know, I use the expression borrowed from the military a lot. The last person I want on my six is someone with untreated PTSD. Any day of the week, I'll take someone with PTSD in treatment. And so the idea that we are going to hide mental health and make it a bad thing, we've done it in the military for years. You know, go to the nut hut. You know, this is not helping because what it does is it gets people to not talk about it. That means you're going out any potential day with someone who is in bad shape, has lower concentration, lower reaction time, maybe exhausted, maybe hungover. But if we make mental health something we can talk about, then it means that you're going out with someone who maybe is getting care for that. And we know that these treatments work. And I always say, I'd rather have someone on my six who's in care that we can make better than someone who's scared to death to even let us know he's in care and is impaired, right? So I think it's an important thing to consider when we talk about culture and mental health. So what can you do? Just some bottom lines. You know, we're all isolating because of COVID. And one of the things I do is I have a private company with some colleagues where we're looking at the impact of job on people. And we look at anxiety and depression and suicidality. And one of the biggest things we're seeing in first responders is ostracism. People are not feeling part of that cohesive whole anymore. You know, they're not feeling part of a unit. And so it's really important that we start talking, especially now that we have COVID on top of it, how to get people connected, because connection can mean everything to people. And then working on that cynicism. Again, going back to why we took that job as a firefighter, as an EMT. What was it about it that drew it to us, right? It wasn't the paycheck that was grabbing you, I'm sure. You know, there was something about it that you loved, and trying to remind ourselves of that. And it may sound silly, but it does change your frame of reference when you're going into a situation. Again, being really mindful if you're using stimulants, you know, or depressants, as in alcohol or other things. Be aware, have a healthy diet, you know, do your exercise. We know that doing exercise actually increases energy. And so being very mindful. And then I always say, find meaning in your life. You know, it's very hard with COVID to do some of the things that we used to do, but I always suggest have a friend who has nothing to do with your job, right? For my psychologist, I always say, have a friend who doesn't know anything about mental health. You've got to have those people that can provide that balance in your life and talk about other things. And then again, number 6, I think is one of the most important. Find a sense of humor. Allow yourself to laugh at you and to laugh at everything else, right? And one of the things I love about some of my close friends is we constantly send each other jokes because it's so important to keep that laughter going. And then, of course, the last one I say tongue in cheek, sleep. I know what you all do for a living, but sleep is really important. And it's one of the most restorative things. And I'm going to end my talk in just a second by highlighting caffeine impairs sleep. So I know a lot of folks think, oh, I can sleep on a pot of coffee. Yes, you can sleep. but you didn't sleep well. And what happens is you don't make it down to delta or restorative sleep. So it's really, really critical that if at all possible, you stop using caffeine, and don't shoot me here, about 6 hours before you go to bed, because it actually impairs sleep significantly. And a lot of people say, oh, but I can do 6 cups of coffee in a row in the morning. Do you know you've no enhanced performance from 1 cup of coffee to 6? There's actually a level at which you get, and you've optimal performance, and everything else you're taking from there is just add on, and it's just psychology. You just think it's improving performance. It's actually not. So I always tell people, think about reducing your caffeine gently and slowly, but definitely before you're going to bed, because it will improve your sleep. And then last but not least, I just want to highlight, obviously, the First Responder Network and all the folks from OMOS and the folks that are on the call, but a couple other resources we have out there. There's PTSD Coach, which is a free app on how to get support there. The National Center for PTSD is a group I'm a part of that's wonderful. And then last but not least, for any of you that are veterans out there, that's the number to our clinic. And for any of you who are non-veterans, that's the stress center that I run at UC that does all of these evidence-based therapies that we talked about. This is the one that some of you caught a few years ago. Joey Votto actually gave me the money to start this and be able to handle paying for insurance benefits when people couldn't afford to. And so we're out here for you whenever you need us. If there's anything that I can answer, I do take calls when people just have questions and they want to know how they can get help or what I can do. I'm always happy to answer those questions with whatever you need. So let me just say, is there anything that I didn't answer that I could answer now? And if not, feel free to type in the chat. For those of you who just discovered it, there's a chat line you can talk into. And please also feel free to use any of those phone numbers and to contact me directly. It'd be a private call. No one would need to know about it. And I'd be happy to talk with you about PTSD. But with that, I'd like to just say thank you very much for having me. And I'll turn it back over to Steve.
Thank you so much, Doc. Really appreciate it. Again, please don't hesitate to reach out to Dr. Chard through the stress center down there, and she gets right back to folks and gets some information. I'd like to introduce Lieutenant Matt Esquia. Lieutenant Esquia is with the Akron Fire Department. He's also with the Ohio Association of Professional Firefighters and has done a lot of work in regards to peer support for just not fire service, but for first responders all over the state of Ohio and especially in that Northeast Ohio area. So, Matt, it's all yours, sir.
Okay, thanks so much, Steve. I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me to this. I know, late July is tough to get a lot of us together to talk about this, but I certainly appreciate you having me here and giving me the opportunity to talk about this really important subject. So, disclaimer, this is the first time I've ever done one of these online type presentations. So if I have some issues with the technical things here, just bear with me. So. Okay, can everybody see my presentation here? Is this visible for everyone?
No.
It's not up, Matt. We see you.
Okay. Let's give me a brief.
There we go.
Got it? All right. Fantastic. Okay, first, also, I wanted to say thanks to Dr. Chard. She is such an expert with post-traumatic stress and has done so many things for first responders that I know of. So thanks so much for her. That was excellent and some great information. So I'm going to be talking a little about. Thanks, Kate. I'm going to talk a lot about peer support and just some general issues facing first responders, specifically firefighters, in regards to mental health, self-care, and peer support. So a little bit about me. My name is Matt Esquia. I'm a lieutenant with Akron Fire Department. I've been on the job for about 15 and a half years, and I'm currently the director for the OAPFF Peer Support Program. I've been married, just a little bit about me personally. I've been married for 18 years to my wife, Emily. She's a special education teacher up here in Northeast Ohio. And I have a 16-year-old daughter, Macy, as you can see here in the picture. This was taken a couple years ago down in Florida. So having a teenage daughter can be just as challenging as being a firefighter sometimes. So those of you who have teenage kids can certainly relate. Prior to my career with the fire service, I worked at a public mental health agency as a counselor and a caseworker from 1998 to 2006. And I primarily worked with people with severe mental illnesses, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. Right after I finished my graduate work in counseling, I took the test to get on Akron Fire Department. I scored well enough, and the rest is history. But I have kept my licensure in the state of Ohio for the past 16, 17 years or so. So they felt that I was a good representation for the OAPFF Peer Support Program. I'm going to show a little video here just to kind of talk, which kind of addresses some of the concerns that we're having in the fire service.
Did you share with sound, LT?
Are you guys able to hear this?
No,
sir.
yeah, you
Okay.
mean to do a streaming through your sound setup?
Okay. So we're going to skip that video, but basically it shows a full-time firefighter down in the Tennessee area who was experiencing depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress for years. He attempted suicide. He actually suffered a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head and survived it, and realized after the fact that the years of exposures to traumatic events and some alcohol use, he attempted to take his life. And then after the fact, he got help, treatment, and things are a lot better for him. But peer support provided a lot of support for this individual, and it seems to be that that's a key thing that we need in the fire service. So I'm going to talk about some general behavioral health issues with first responders that's gotten a lot of needed attention recently. So when we talk about behavioral health, it's typically an umbrella which encompasses mental illness, which is like PTSD, which Dr. Shard talked about, major depression, and bipolar disorder. It also refers to substance abuse and addiction, stress, and general mental and emotional health. And why are we talking about this? Why has this gotten so much attention recently? We know that first responders are a very resilient group of people. We wouldn't be able to do this job if we weren't. The day-to-day interactions that we have and exposures that we have to traumatic events over the course of weeks, months, and years, and then even decades, you have to be a resilient person to be a first responder. So most of us we know are going to do very, very well. However, we also know that first responders are going to experience some emotional issues over the course of their career. And it can be related to your work, which this is obvious because we are exposed to so much stuff. As Dr. Shard said, it's estimated that 20% of full-time firefighters and 33% of EMS providers will develop PTSD at some point in their career. And this is compared to about 7.8% of the general population. There's also some research out that shows that first responders are also more likely to suffer from other types of mental health problems. But the key is that we're less likely to seek help than the general population. And that's where peer support can be so important. Depression, PTSD, anxiety sometimes can lead to suicide. Although we still don't have a great way of gathering really good data on firefighter and paramedic suicide, it appears to be on the rise. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We know that suicide is also on the rise in the general population, significantly on the rise. And there's a lot of discussion as to why that is, and social isolation with people more involved with technology, stress of the 21st century. There's a lot of theories as to why that is, but we certainly believe that first responder suicide appears to be on the rise. The CDC states that firefighting ranks 6 on their occupations with the highest suicide rates. National surveys also place firefighting as the second most stressful career in the United States, and that's just behind active military members. I believe police officers are just behind us at number 3. Although with the current state of affairs, that they might be taking the lead with that. We also know that first responders are taking their lives at a rate of 2 to 3 times more than in the line of duty. We spend a lot of time training for fires and hazmat situations, trot rescue and EMS, but we really don't spend a lot of time on self-care and mental health and taking care of each other, despite the fact that we're more likely to die by suicide than we are on the fire ground. You can see this chart here. This goes back to 2007 and goes up to 2016. And these are firefighter deaths from during that time period. You can see the blue here represents line of duty deaths and the orange represent suicides. We have to take this with a grain of salt, though, because we have never really had a good way of reporting firefighter suicides. We've gotten a lot better, but the folks that are providing this information think that these numbers, you see here in 2016, there were 135 reported firefighter suicides. There's belief that that number actually may be 2 to 3 times higher than that, based on the way that this is reported. So when we're talking about suicide, it's important to kind of understand what are the risk factors with suicide in general. And you can see here that risk factors, white males are the highest group of individuals to die by suicide. And white males make up a large portion of first responders. A history of post-traumatic stress disorder, history of clinical depression, chronic pain and injuries. We know that chronic exposure to traumatic events, burnout, compassion fatigue can lead to depression, which can lead to suicide. Alcohol abuse, big one. Another huge one is divorce and marital problems. We know that first responders are more likely to experience divorce than the general population. Impulsive or aggressive tendencies. Do we know anybody like this that works in the fire service? Type A personalities. Isolation, a feeling being cut off from other people. I know Dr. Shard was talking about how firefighters that are married are less likely to experience PTSD, and it's because of that support system that we have. Easy access to firearms. Do police and firefighters like their firearms? Absolutely. But the easy access to those firearms may increase the likelihood of taking your own life, because we know that the number one way that firefighters and people take their lives in the United States is by self-inflicted gunshot wounds. And the unwillingness to seek help because of the stigma attached to mental health and substance abuse disorders. And that's what we're trying to do with the peer support program, is to reduce this stigma. In addition to the general risk factors for the general population, there's additional firefighter and medic specific risk factors. And these are shift work and sleep deprivation, the potentially traumatic calls or the critical incidents that we experience on a regular basis, compassion, fatigue, and burnout, huge in the fire service, and just the daily stressors of the job. So a lot of times when you combine all of these different factors, you're going to have some type of mental health crisis. A study was done in Chicago several years ago, from 1990 to 2010, where they actually tracked firefighter line of duty deaths and suicides. And you can see in the bottom right corner the Chicago firefighter suicide rate, and the national rate. And it kind of bounces around because this is a fairly small sample group. But you can see here that the number of incidents per 100,000 are significantly higher in the fire service for suicides. EMS personnel, we're seeing a lot of the same types of things. 37% of EMS providers reported suicide contemplation during this study. And that's in comparison to only 3.7% of the national average, which is 10 times more of the individuals surveyed thought about taking their own life. The actual attempts, 6.6% to 0.5%. And I found these numbers to be pretty astonishing. So what are we doing to address this? We know that there's a problem. We've known that there's a problem for quite some time. And so what are we doing as firefighters and as organizations to talk about this? I'll start off by talking about the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. About 10, 15 years ago, they set up the Life Safety Initiative number 13, which is a new model. And this was developed to address first responder mental health. And it was developed after a 3-year consensus using research and best practices. It's also being used in civilian application, the military, and other high-risk professions. So why was this new model developed? Why did they determine something new was needed? Well, after doing all the research, they knew that the past interventions that were being done in the fire service and with police officers were typically a one-size-fits-all. CISM programs have been around for a long time, but traditionally speaking, CISM were more reactive as opposed to proactive. And, you know, at one time, that was the best that we can offer. The current research has demonstrated that different people have different levels of emotional resiliency. So what we're trying to do, in addition to providing the help on a peer-to-peer level, we're trying to improve resiliency among our members, and we're trying to promote healthy habits. Most firefighters and first responders are going to be able to handle large amounts of stress and trauma, sleep deprivation, exposure to traumatic events, and again, like I said at the beginning of this discussion, most of us are going to be fine, but others are going to need some assistance, and some are going to need clinical intervention to recover. Research shows that past practices didn't do enough for firefighters in need, and we need to do more. In fact, some of the past practices that we were doing made things worse as opposed to better, which is why we really have to focus on best practices. So what are the new components, the components of this new model? In a nutshell, peer support, huge component of the new model. Enhanced behavioral health assistance programs, which is having a strong relationship with your EAP provider. The trauma screening questionnaire, which is an assessment tool that's used to screen for post-traumatic stress, and an exposure to potentially traumatic events protocol. Stress First Aid is a program that is, it has several different names. In the fire service, it's called Stress First Aid. It's also in with civilians, it's mental health first aid, and it's even called psychological first aid. But it's a peer-to-peer model that aims to reduce distress, foster adaptive functioning, provide tangible organizational support, and it increases the individual's sense of competence and confidence. And this is a great program that's offered through the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. They do face-to-face trainings when we're not in a global pandemic, but there's also the option of getting that training online through the Fire Hero Learning Network. That course has also been offered multiple times at the Ohio Fire Academy, so I would highly recommend that to anybody that's interested. I'm going to talk a little bit about stigma. Studies have shown that first responders are less likely to seek mental health treatment due to stigma. This has been going on for years and years. My personal belief is that things have gotten a lot better in the past 5 years or so. These stigmas survive through subconscious behaviors, jokes, and conversations. You know, the suck it up buttercup attitude has existed for a long time. And it really does discourage those struggling from speaking up and getting help. We don't want to be the weak person. We don't want to be the individual who has depression, anxiety, PTSD. So we want to try to reduce that stigma as much as possible. As first responders, I believe that we develop this persona that we are the ones in our community where everybody turns to for help. And when you develop that persona, I think it becomes really uncomfortable for us to come forward and to be vulnerable to get help ourselves. So stigma, I think, it really affects people's ability to step up and get some help. A lot of other individuals are afraid that their careers are going to be negatively affected. If you say, hey, I might have PTSD, I need some help, I need to contact somebody from our EAP, there's concern, hey, I might not get promoted, I could even lose my job. My crew and my company have lost faith in me. They might feel like they don't want to work with me anymore. There's also the idea that, hey, trauma is part of the job. If you can't handle this, if you're having reactions to this job might not be for you. You just need to quit and move on. So those are all very unhealthy attitudes to have. So a little bit about peer support programs. First responder peer support teams consists of members, whether it's other firefighters, paramedics, police officers, correction officers, dispatchers, and they've been trained in lots of different topics: therapeutic communication, crisis intervention, and community resource networking. Also, confidentiality is a big topic that we talk about because, obviously without confidentiality, your entire program is not going to work. Peer supporters can provide assistance to both active and retired firefighters who are experiencing mental health and/or addiction issues. We're really clear with our programs and our teams that peer support does not replace definitive mental health treatment. It's simply a bridge to outside treatment. And since we don't have sound, this was a story that a Columbus News did on one of our Ohio peers, and I believe he's in on the call. But this was a great story that highlighted our program, but I'm not going to show it because I don't have sound on my side. So why peer support? We'll talk a little bit about why we feel that peer support is a very important key with providing mental health to our members. Research shows that fire and EMS personnel are more likely to approach a peer when dealing with emotional problems. Again, that goes back to a lot of the stigma. We know that, hey, if we have somebody in the firehouse or that we can talk to who may have experienced some of the same things that we've experienced, we're a lot more comfortable with that. Again, we support other programs, but we're not a replacement for critical incident stress management, chaplaincy services, EAPs, clinicians, or community programs. It's simply a bridge to other resources. So how can peer support help? Well, we know that first responders work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We are always on call. There's never a time of the day or year when we are not going to come out to help. So giving support when it's needed the most. With peers working in the firehouse, we know that if needed, they can respond to other firefighters at any given time. We can also provide critical education to other firefighters and paramedics. We provide training on self-care, psychological stress and trauma, resource utilization to new recruits, and during ongoing department and agency trainings. We can respond in moments of crisis, so that 3 o'clock in the morning fire, where we might have a fatality. We're always available, during and after one of these atypical stressful events. Peers that are provided in stress first aid can provide much needed rehabilitation to individuals immediately after a call, and even referrals shortly after the call as well to the professional help. Offering accountability to self-care. Basically what this means is peers walk the walk. So we're on the calls. We're experiencing the same things that others are experiencing. We're on those traffic accidents. We're on, the house fires. So we can really relate. So firefighters and cops feel that, hey, a lot of people don't really understand what we do and what we see and how we feel. But if I'm talking to another firefighter or peer, they're going to get where I'm coming from a lot more so than, somebody else outside of the fire service. This actually helps a lot with self-help groups as well, especially when it comes to like addiction. Really, really important thing that we've really focused on, not just in Akron, but in Summit County, but across the state of Ohio, is building the bridges to the professional help, developing relationships with your EAP providers, and all of the resources that your community might have. We are really, really lucky here in Summit County. We have multiple organizations that are very familiar with the first responder cultures and some of the unique situations that we have. We have the Safety Forces Support Center. SUMA has a traumatic stress center that offers fantastic evidence-based treatment on traumatic stress injuries. And we also have a very solid EAP program in Akron. Our peer supporters from across the state who are involved with the OAPFF, over the past 3 years, we've gone out and we've developed those relationships. And in a way, we've kind of vetted some of the clinicians that we have across the state, so that when we do provide those referrals, we know that we are sending, our brothers and sisters to high quality therapists and clinicians. Peers should be able to answer concerns like, hey, what should I expect in counseling? What's going to happen there? Are they going to pick my brain? Are they going to share what they find with me, with my employer? We might be able to answer insurance questions. Does this counselor or therapist accept our insurance? How far does confidentiality go? So we teach our peers to be able to answer those questions so that they can take away a lot of the fear that people may have with actually getting some of that professional help. Vetting community resources and having answers to common questions about treatment reduces stigma and anxiety about getting professional help, and we know that. So the different types of peer support programs that exist. Peer teams exist across the country, and there are several different types. There's department and municipal peer support programs. FDNY is a great example of that. FDNY, kind of invented peer support. Shortly after 9/11, they realized that some of the things that they were doing and weren't doing weren't really helpful. So they developed a very robust peer support program with FDNY. So Cincinnati and Dayton have their own programs. These organizations can work in conjunction with EAP programs. There's nonprofit state organizations. I know that Illinois, North Carolina, and Florida have really great programs that they're doing. Oregon, out on the West Coast, is doing some great things. The benefit of these is that this can be full-time, part-time, and volunteer departments can all benefit from these types of programs. Another good thing about the organizations that aren't involved with a department or a municipal peer team is that a lot of firefighters and police officers may not feel comfortable going to someone they know. They may be more comfortable with going to a firefighter that they don't know from across the state when discussing a problem. So with the nonprofit state organizations, the chances are that you can talk to somebody that you don't know at all are going to be much more likely than, if you go to somebody within your own department. There's also the union and labor organizations. The IAFF provides peer support training across the country. They've done a fantastic job with promoting this program. The downside to these is that sometimes some of the services are limited to union members. The IAFF, we started our OAPFF team about 3.5 years ago. We have about 30 to 35 peers trained across the state of Ohio, and I'm going to talk about that here in a little bit. So how to set up a peer support team. First off, you have to get buy-in from your administration or your local. We know that mentally healthy employees make for better business. We use less sick time and we're more productive. So ultimately, having a peer team is likely going to save your organization money. And administration loves to hear that. Next thing you need to do is identify potential members. And how do you pick your members? Well, we recommend that the members that you choose are highly respected, they're trusted with confidentiality. We know that if you telephone, tell a firefighter, but we need to make sure that everything that is discussed in peer-to-peer interactions is confidential. Experienced firefighters, very important as well. It goes back to that, hey, you know, they've walked the walk and they talk the talk. Good listening, you know, we want people to have very good active listening skills, and that's a big part of the initial peer support training that we do. And also to be open-minded, to be able to accept things that you may not approve of, things that you may not have experienced yourself. Being open-minded is definitely important when it comes to picking a member of a peer team. You should have a clinical advisor and a team leader. Teams must have team leaders and advisors that are licensed clinician and must use that advisor when dealing with significant issues. Having a protocol and operational procedures is very important. SOPs are required, you know, with anything that we do in the fire service, and peer support isn't any different. Create or adapt a training curriculum. Existing curriculum is available. The IAFF provides a class. It's 16 hours long. It goes over 2 days, 8 hours each day. And some programs are 24 hours. Ongoing CE, I know that we recommend in Ohio and Akron that members get at least 8 hours per year of peer support training. Administration buy-in, these are questions that you can ask your organization. Whose support do we need, and how do we gain that support? Clinical oversight, how can we identify or recruit a behavioral health clinician? Surprising, I guess this was kind of surprising to me when I first started the program, is clinicians in the community want to help first responders. We have had multiple clinicians come forward and offer all kinds of services to us free of charge. The University of Akron helped us do our peer support training, and they have been tremendous with providing us guidance and continuing education. So reach out to members in your clinicians in your community, and I think you'll be surprised as to how many people would want to help first responders. Recruitment. How should we recruit and screen potential peers? One way that we thought about was to send out a questionnaire to everybody in your department or your local to say, hey, name the top 5 or 10 people that you would feel comfortable with going and talking to. And once those came back, you would approach those members and ask them if they'd want to be on the peer team. And your EAPs, what steps can we take to build better relationships or address any problems with your current EAP? Peer support questions for your organization, your referral network. How are you going to refer people? How will that look? How will confidentiality work with that? Outreach. How are you going to promote your program? Are you going to develop flyers, create a website? Are you going to get out and do face-to-face presentations to your members? And what other types of activities can serve as education and outreach? Relevant standard operational procedures. This is when you can run into some issues with this based on your local or your department's rules. So those take up a lot of time developing those SOPs. Outcome and impact. How do we demonstrate if our program is effective? And what types of quality improvement do we need to look at as well? It's also important that you develop a mental health committee with a diverse membership. This is crucial as well. So these are just some basic recommendations for first responders and administration. We want to assist in creating a culture of resiliency by encouraging and this is repeat from what Dr. Shard was talking about earlier, exercise. It's crucial that we exercise. So we know that exercise leads to better mood, better sleep, and better everything, basically. So we need to encourage exercise. Time off. Don't work too much. We know that I know firefighters sometimes will put in 100 hours a week between, you know, their full-time job, any potential overtime, and any side jobs that they have. So working too much is definitely detrimental, especially if you're working a part-time fire department job and you go for a week with very, very little sleep. We know this is very detrimental. So time off is very, very critical. Sleep. We can only control this so much because we work every third day. So if we're every third day, we're up most of the night, there's not a lot we can do about that, but we can do things to improve our sleep on our days off. And that's practicing good sleep hygiene. Self-care and meditation, we know that this is very, very important. You know, meditation and mindfulness is gaining a lot of attention and has been proven to increase resiliency. And just increasing healthy habits, you know, do what you like to do. We know that spending high quality time with our family and loved ones and doing the things that you like to do, whether that's fishing or hiking or camping or travel or boating, increasing those healthy habits improves resiliency. And also improving, working on your sense of humor, you know, and we have quite a dark humor in the fire service, and I know the police are the same, but gallows humor can be quite healthy. And one thing here that I didn't put in is practicing empathy. We know that sometimes if you fake practicing empathy, even if you don't really feel like being nice to someone because you're in a bad mood, you're tired, you're grumpy, but we know that even just practicing or even fake being nice to someone improves your mood. So practicing empathy is really helpful. So real quick, I'm going to go through this. I'm running a little short on time, and I know I'm long-winded here, but just some more recommendations for peer programs. Identify that resource bank. And those resource banks can be EAPs, chaplains, existing CISM teams, private mental health agencies, county mental health boards, union programs, and state and national services. EAPs are great. You know, they're fantastic. A lot of departments don't have EAPs, so if you have one, you're lucky. But it's only one spoke in the wheel. And have that relationship with your EAP. Reach out for them. Have them come and do some training for your peers and your department. Resiliency training, self-care training. So make your EAP work for you. Invite them to do a ride-along. Have them come to the fire station. Have them sit and have dinner with you at the fire station. And this includes any clinician out in the community that you're working with. The more that they have that relationship with the fire service, the more that they understand the first responder culture, I think that's going to reduce stigma among your members as well. Above all, protect confidentiality. Without that confidentiality, firefighters will not be accepting of the peer program. We know how quickly rumors can spread, so we need to protect confidentiality at all costs. Some more recommendations: provide a status check on crews after bad calls. Sometimes that simple check-in or phone call will show others that it's okay to talk about a bad call. So if we do that on a regular basis, you can reduce the stigma as well over the long term. We know that keeping it in is detrimental. So giving people the opportunity to talk about the bad calls is good. But we also don't want to force people to talk about them because everybody deals with things in their own way. Sometimes these status checks may resemble like a diffusing of the old CISM model. Okay, I'm going to wrap up here, which is talking about some of the resources. For those of you that aren't familiar, the OAPFF developed a website a few years ago, firefightermentalhealth.org, and anybody can log on to that website and see the peer support team from across the state. We have 5 districts in Ohio, and each one of those districts has multiple peer supporters, and we're available anytime you want to call us. You know, those numbers that are on that website are our own personal numbers. That's how important the peers on this team feel about this cause. You can do some research on the common problems that firefighters and first responders have. We have a blog on there. There's a self-care tab, and on the far right here, you'll see a resources tab. And that's where we update that site with training opportunities, both face-to-face and online. There is a large resource bank listed on there for all 5 districts in Ohio, so that if you're looking for mental health resources, you can go to that tab and find local resources. And there's also protocols and standard operating procedures on there as well. There's also manuals that will help with your program development. The IAFF Center of Excellence is an inpatient treatment facility outside of Baltimore, Maryland, that provides treatment for any IAFF firefighter. This has been in existence now for just over 4 years, and we've had some great success with this program. So I'd recommend looking into this. The First Responder Center of Excellence is operated through the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. Again, the individuals that work for the First Responder Center of Excellence use best practices when developing their procedures and their policies. So I'd recommend checking that out as well. So that's about all I have. With peer support, I'm wrapping up at right about 40 minutes here. So I tried to stay on time. So if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Okay.
Great, Matt. Thank you very much. Again, if you have any questions, you can reach out to Matt. My contact information will be at the end of my slides as well, so you can reach out. I can get information to Matt or Dr. Chard if you have anything. You can also reach out to Heidi, Dan, any of the folks at the State Fire Academy, and those folks can also get us information or questions that you might have as we move forward. So I'd like to talk to you guys for just a little bit, and we're going to wrap up today, and we're going to wrap up in plenty of time so that if we do have any questions, we can answer those questions. And I believe the Academy will have a couple of things that they want to address here at the end. But I think that what we've heard today is just extremely important, and that's why I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit before we wrap up today about the idea of self-care and why it's important. Turn down some of that light there. Why it's important that sometimes you be reminded. Nothing I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes is going to be earth-shattering or blow your mind or anything else like that, but it's important that you remember that you need to take care of you while you're so busy taking care of others, be it your community, be it coworkers, family, friends, folks in your neighborhood, whoever you're taking care of in this world. And that's what you do. Your sheepdogs, you take care of folks. That's an analogy that I steal from law enforcement, and that is your protectors, and that is what you do. For those of you I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Steve Click. I am the First Responder Liaison to Ohio Mental Health and Addiction Services. I help assist Ohio's 100,000 plus first responders, which is police, fire, EMS, corrections, dispatch, and some of our Ohio-based military. My job is to create bridges and liaisons between mental health and public safety community. I've been in this role since December of 2018. Prior to that, I spent 36 years with the Ohio State Highway Patrol. My last 2.5 years on the patrol, I oversaw the Ohio Assist program, which is an outstanding program which provides a series of 3-day seminars here in the state of Ohio. They've done 9 to date. Our next one is scheduled for late October of this year, and we have another one scheduled for late November. Obviously, due to what's been going on with COVID, we've had to unfortunately postpone a couple of events, but we're hoping to get back on track soon, depending on the guidance and advice that we get. But so that kind of is a little bit about my background and where I come from. Now, for the next little bit, the things that I'm going to talk about, I absolutely do not anticipate causing any feelings of discomfort, anxiety, or anything else like that. But I always do want to make sure that I let folks know that if we do start to go anywhere, you start to feel something that doesn't make you comfortable, or you start to feel a little bit anxious, please absolutely log off, get a hold of us, get a hold of Heidi or Dan at the Academy, myself. We'll get you the information you need so that way we can continue to do that. But we don't want anybody to feel anxious or uncomfortable as we talk this afternoon for a little bit. So, you know, we talk about a lot of things, and one of the things that always comes up, and, you know, one of the courses that we provide is a course called Crisis Awareness. And in that crisis awareness course, we talk about some of the possible reactions. And again, possible, they're not necessarily a checklist. You might see some, you might see all, you might see none. They may come, they may go, they may stick around. But we talk about those things in that course, and eventually we get to the idea we want to talk about how can we help. And that's a question that we always get asked. Okay, I get it. I understand the stress and trauma of the job, but how can I help my coworkers? How can I help my spouse? How can I help my friends and stuff? So we want to talk a little bit about that this afternoon as we're wrapping up. One of the best things that you can do, one of the absolute best things you can do is listen. Now, when I say listen, understand they don't really want to know what you think they should have done, just like you don't really want to know what they think you should have done. What they want is somebody to listen to them. And when it comes time to listen, we're not good at that. We start to hear a problem and we immediately want to address it and give them a solution. But in many cases, they need to come up with that solution on their own. They may even have a solution that they just need to talk about. And we need to be careful about some of the things and some of the answers that we give. So let's say an individual was on a fire response and they made a mistake. They did something wrong. And as a result, something bad might have happened. And they come to you and they say, hey, do you think I screwed that up? Do you think I was wrong in my decision? Now, you've got two choices at this point. Choice number one is to say, oh my gosh, yeah, you screwed that up just about as bad as somebody possibly could, and I can't imagine anybody making it any worse. That's not helpful because you're not going to give them the opportunity to come to the solutions themselves, and actually they could become defensive because you've just crushed them with what they said. At the same time, you don't want to lie. You don't want to say, oh, absolutely not, you were fantastic, because they know they weren't. And if they're coming to ask you, they probably suspect that there was a problem, or they've already been told there was a problem. Option two, as opposed to one of those two things, is why don't you say something along the lines of, you know what, we'll work on it together. We're going to learn about this together. We're going to fix this. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here supporting you, and we'll figure this out together. You're not lying to them. You're not telling them everything was great. And at the same time, you're not crushing them. You're offering support and you're saying, look, I'll be here. But very often, all folks want is just somebody to listen to them. Not look at your phone, not look at the computer, not look at your watch. Give them the time that they need to talk and just listen to them. If they ask what you think, be careful about how you answer that. Always be honest. Always be honest, because we're professional lie detectors in public safety. We all know how to detect when people are not being honest with us, and they'll know that with you too. But just listen to them. Just give them the time. Be a person that they can listen to, and especially in the last couple of months where a lot of folks have felt isolated and maybe separated, this is a great opportunity to connect. Stay in touch with others. One of the programs that the Ohio Department of Mental Health has in conjunction with the governor's office is Strive for 5. And Strive for 5 is an initiative where you reach out each day to 5 people in your world. Maybe it's folks that you haven't heard from for a while. Maybe it's somebody that you kind of know but maybe aren't really close with and don't regularly communicate with. There's a group of folks that I regularly communicate with, if not daily, at least every other day. But I try to make sure that at some point I reach out to some folks that maybe I haven't seen for a while or talked to for a while. Take advantage of the technology, FaceTime on iPhones or sending text messages, which aren't as great as a phone call. Take advantage of things like Microsoft Teams, Skype, the different programs that allow you to see each other. Since COVID, I felt disconnected. One of the things that I've been doing is meetings that I have, even one-on-ones with individuals. I try to take advantage of the technology so that I can actually see them. I feel a little bit more connected when I do that. One of the other things that my wife and I do is, we walk. We walk here in our neighborhood, weather permitting, and we've met neighbors that we didn't even know before. And that's enabled us to be able to talk to folks and say hi. We maintain our physical distance. Absolutely. I believe that's important. I believe that we need to follow the recommendations. We need to maintain those physical distances. But a problem I have with the term social distance is I think it creates an idea that we need to shut ourselves off. And I think right now, especially, is the last thing we need to do is shut ourselves off. We need to stay in touch with family. We need to stay in touch with friends, coworkers. And again, reach out to somebody maybe that you haven't talked to for a while. And what you might never know is what kind of a day they were having. What struggle were they having? And all of a sudden this message pops up, or your phone number pops up and your picture in their address book, or they get an email from you, or even, a card or a letter and something like that. And you have no idea what they were going through that day, and what, you might really bring a smile to their face that they actually really needed to hear from you or hear from somebody today. So please, stay in touch with others. Help with if it's happened to somebody in your family, if it's happened to something's happened to someone in your home, help with tasks around the house, but don't take them over. If their job is the laundry, trash, and the bills, their job is still laundry, trash, and the bills. Doesn't mean you can't sack the trash up for them and get it ready to go out, but let them take it out. Put the receipts on the desk so that way they can do the checkbook. That's great. Don't do the checkbook for them. The idea behind that is they need to understand that they can handle the things that they need to take care of and that are their responsibility. You can help, absolutely, but you don't want to baby them. Because when we baby folks, we let them know, look, you can't handle the little things. You certainly can't handle the big things. Give them some personal time, but be available if they want company. So there are times that here in the house, maybe my wife is downstairs working on something. I might be upstairs. One of us could be out in the yard doing something like that. But in the event that one of us really needs the other one right then, we're very close and we can be reached immediately. Everybody needs a little bit of them time, and that's absolutely fine. But be available if that person wants to talk, and here's the other thing, you don't have to talk. You can just be in the room together, and it can be watching television, it can be reading, it can be listening to music, it can just be, sitting there and just being there together. You don't have to have conversation in order to provide support for another person and them to provide support for you. Not any time in our lives, in our generation's time, has anything been as widespread as what we've dealt with since, the COVID has come out, and certainly the civil unrest that we've seen in the last couple of months. And this has affected everybody. So please understand when they express anger, when they express fear or frustration, while you may be the one, hearing it, and it may kind of be directed at you at the time, please understand it may very well not be aimed at you. I know that especially at the beginning of the COVID situation, where we went to work at home, and I wasn't very busy initially because we hadn't transitioned to a virtual workplace and made those contacts yet. I noticed that I had a much shorter fuse, and that it had absolutely nothing to do with my wife. It had absolutely nothing to do with what she was telling me or whatever. It was just the fact that I had this built up and it needed to go somewhere. And understand that a lot of your family and your friends and the people you work with are experiencing the same things you are. So while I would ask them to give you a little bit of grace, I would ask you to extend a little bit of grace to them as they continue to go through this situation. And we're all kind of going through it. I know everybody kind of gets tired of hearing it. We are all in this together. No one has been exempt from this. No community has been exempt. No county, no state, no occupation has been exempt from everything that's going on. So understand the anger, fear, and frustration, it may or may not be directed at you, even though you're the one that is hearing it. We have to be careful about what we say. And, so often things we say them automatically and we don't even think about it. We walk in when we were all coming to the office, or if you see somebody in public and you go, hey, how you doing? And they go, good, how are you? And oh, good. And we don't pay the least bit of attention. It's just what we say, but we've got to be careful, especially now with the things that we say. Be very careful about saying, I'll be there for you if you can't be. If you've got things going on in your life, if you've got responsibilities that you need to take care of, family, work obligations, and so forth, we want to be very careful about saying to someone, I'll be there for you if we can't be, because they're counting on that. They're depending on that. And if you said you would be there and then you can't be, and they try several times and they need your assistance and you never seem to be available, it's a second event. A negative event that's happened for them. Not only the initial thing that happened or the initial things that happened, but now that person who I was counting on, that person who said they would be there, isn't. So be careful about that. Don't say it could be worse. I've heard people say that, well, it could have always been worse. Well, yeah, it always could be worse. I mean, we could get hit with a meteorite. I mean, there's a lot of ways it could be worse that many of us have thought of. And many folks sometimes go to the negative, but we don't need to encourage that. So be careful about, trying to say, hey, look, it isn't all bad, or it could have been a lot worse, because they've probably already gone there. They've probably already thought that. Be careful about saying you understand. They might challenge you. Now, at one point in my career with the Ohio State Highway Patrol, over about a 4.5-year period, I was either at the scene or I met the officers involved at the patrol post of every shooting that the Ohio State Highway Patrol had been involved in for about a 4.5-year stretch. I myself, fortunately, never had to pull my trigger against a human being. I put down a couple of animals, but I never had to fire at another human being. And the one and only time I ever got shot at in my career, he didn't even realize that he was shooting at us. I was coming out of the woods, and I just happened to be in the wrong place. And as soon as he saw me and I yelled, he dropped his weapon, and everything was fine. So contrary to what the media would have you believe, most law enforcement officers go through their entire career never having had to pull a trigger at someone or having had a trigger pulled at them. Some officers do, unfortunately, but many go through their entire career and never have that happen. But when I went to those shootings and I talked to those officers who had been involved in those incidents, several of which had actually had to take a life, I would have never wanted to say, I understand. Because if they looked at me and said, really, who did you shoot? Immediately, we have a barrier. Immediately, I've created an obstruction to us being able to further communicate, because I've said something that now they've called me on. Really, how do you understand? So if someone at your department, if we lose somebody and you go to their family and say, hey, I understand, and they're like, really? Because your spouse is still alive. And so be careful about saying that. I know where it comes from. We all know where it comes from. It's meant to be empathetic. It's meant to be supportive. I get that. But just be very, very careful about saying you understand. Now, that being said, if you have a similar circumstance, very similar circumstance as to what they're going through, and you say, I understand, and they say, really? How do you understand what I'm going through? And then you can quickly, very briefly relate your experience. That can actually build a connection between the two of you. So you've actually been there, you understand what they're going through, and that can be a very strong bond between two individuals. One of the things that I tried to do in my time on the patrol is, if it was a shooting, if it was a use of deadly force by an officer, I tried to make sure that I had several people that I could call upon and who had been in that exact same circumstance, whether they were with our agency or another agency, and I could say, look, I've got somebody who's been there and knows exactly what you're going through right now if you want to talk to them. And I've tried to connect those folks, and I think that's vitally important. Lieutenant Askia brought up a few minutes ago, the importance of, I may or may not want to talk to somebody on my agency. I may or may not want to talk to somebody I know. And having that individual that understands and has got some training and is empathetic, that they can reach out to, that actually gets what they're going through, can be very, very helpful and beneficial to someone. Stop looking for the perfect thing to say, because it doesn't exist. Had the perfect thing existed, I would have coined it years ago. I'd have trademarked it, and I'd be filthy rich. The perfect thing to say doesn't exist. And the reality is, they're probably, especially if they've lost someone, they're not going to remember it anyhow. I did a number of death notifications in my time on the highway patrol. Started in my coaching period and kind of extended all the way through most of my career. And one of the things that I did is I had to give a death notification one time to a gentleman about his wife had been killed within sight of their house. And we had all been there, and they'd seen the lights, and the next thing he knows is I'm ringing his doorbell about 5:30 in the afternoon, and he comes to the door, and I had to tell him that his wife had been killed. I worked in an area where it was a small town, and I would see this gentleman because he was a local businessman. I would see him, and I would do everything I could to avoid him, because I did not want him to have to see me again and relive that event. But one day I got caught in line at a fast food restaurant, and he was directly behind me, and I couldn't escape. And I turned around, and I saw him behind me, and he was, "Hi, officer." I said, "Hi. You don't remember me, do you?" And he thought for a minute, and he goes, "You're him." I said, "Yes, sir, and I am so very sorry. I've tried very hard to make it so that you didn't have to see me. And remember," he goes, "I'm going to stop you right there. I didn't remember you. I don't remember anything you said to me after you told me my wife had died. I remember the hat, but I couldn't tell you what you look like. I couldn't tell you anything you said. I don't even remember you leaving my home." How arrogant was it of me to think that I factored into his memories from that day? And after these things happen at your department, and after these traumatic or critical incidents that you're dealing with have happened, and you're talking to the survivors and you're talking to the family members and stuff like that, they're probably not going to remember anything you said. So working so hard to be so eloquent and come up with the perfect thing to say, it's not there. A gentleman that I know's daughter was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer as a part of her initial examination to determine that she had become pregnant. They talked to her and they explained that the treatment for the cancer, while not being able to cure her, would buy her a little bit of time, but it would immediately terminate the pregnancy. She and her husband made the decision that they would move forward with the pregnancy and do everything they could to make sure that she delivered a healthy baby. She understood that that meant that she was cutting her time considerably without treatment. They made that informed decision, and 2 weeks after she gave birth to a healthy child, she passed away. Her father was telling me the story that at her funeral, a member of the clergy came up and said, "You know, she's in a better place." And he said, "You know, I got to tell you, Steve, if he wasn't a chaplain, I'd have beat him all over that building." He understood where that came from. That came from a place of trying to comfort. That came from a place of trying to provide solace to a grieving family member. But to her father, where she needed to be was with her child, with her husband, with her parents and her family and friends. That's where she needed to be. I absolutely believe with my entire heart that member of the clergy was saying it from a very good place. He was trying to be comforting at a very bad time, but it wasn't received that way. So the less you say sometimes, the absolute better. Don't baby folks. Don't treat them as though they can't handle things. Folks are very resilient. I believe I heard Matt say a little bit ago how resilient you folks are, and I agree with him 100%. Public safety is very resilient. Otherwise, you wouldn't have survived the academy. I argue that the very first time you ended up with a biological material on your uniform or on your skin, that'd have been it for most people, but you don't. You clean yourself up, you come right back to work. The things that we see, hear, do, experience, smell, if we weren't resilient, we couldn't do that. So we don't need to be babied. Sometimes the best thing to say to somebody after something's happened is, "Hey, I'm just glad you're okay. I'm glad we're here together. We're going to get through this together. You're not by yourself. We'll do this. We'll take care of it." A couple things I want to finish up with here before we wrap up this afternoon. And again, I really appreciate you folks spending your time with us this afternoon and appreciate the Academy for setting this up. Your personal mental health is your responsibility. It is not the responsibility of the agency. It's not the responsibility of the Academy. It's not Lieutenant Esquia, Dr. Chard. It's nobody else's responsibility but yours. Just like your own physical well-being is your responsibility. You have a responsibility to yourself, to your coworkers, to your family, to your friends, to your community, to be the very best you can every single day, because you have to be 100% no matter what. So if I go order a fast food sandwich and I tell the young person at the McDonald's or wherever I go to, I don't want pickles on my sandwich, and he or she ends up putting pickles on my sandwich anyway, I just pick them off. I'm not allergic to them. I just don't like them. No one was hurt. No one was injured. Everybody's going to go home. I'm going to be just fine, even if I end up eating them. In your jobs, given what you do for a living, you don't have that option. If you are not 100%, if you are not completely on your A game, every time you roll out of the station, somebody can get hurt or worse. Maybe it's you, maybe it's somebody else, maybe it's a member of the public. That isn't fair, that we don't get to have a bad day, but that is what it is. What you are as a firefighter, as a medic, as a law enforcement officer, whatever your occupation is not just what you do, it's kind of who you are. And the reason I say that is this, is if you were driving home this afternoon or you were driving somewhere and you watch a motor vehicle accident, you will put your vehicle in park, you'll call 911, you'll get resources on the way, you'll bail out of the vehicle, and you'll do what you can to help folks. You can't help it. You can say you won't, but I know that you will, because you don't have a choice. My brother's an accountant. He's a very successful accountant. He's been very successful in his job, and he does a great job. But when my brother's out in public, he's not wondering if people filed their taxes correctly, or if they used the correct form, or if they followed the right revised code, or whatever the case may be. He doesn't think that. When you're out in public, you're constantly watching. If there's a medical emergency, you're going to try to help. If there's a fire, if something else is going on, you're going to try to help. That's just you. It's built into you. Don't try to fight it because it isn't going to happen. So you have to be 100% every single day. And I've heard my agency doesn't care. And that is a true statement. Your agency doesn't care. No agency that's represented here today cares. The academy doesn't care because the academy is an academy. It is a building. It is equipment. It is technology. Your department is trucks and tools and equipment and bunks and a building and all that. We all expect it to do something it's not physically capable of doing, and then we get angry at it when it doesn't do it. It's the people within the agency that care, the people on this call today, the people you work with, the folks that man the peer support teams, the mental health clinicians in your area, like Matt said. Those are the people that care. You need to take the initiative to take care of yourself and the others that you care about. No one else is going to. Don't ask the public to do it. Don't ask other agencies to do it. Don't even ask your own agency to do it. Want the people in your agency to do it. And you have to take care of yourself and you have to take care of others. Why have we spent this time this afternoon talking to you folks about post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress disorder? Why did Matt talk to you about the different resources and the peer support programs? Because your culture and your personality make you a fixer. I called you sheepdogs a little bit ago. What you do is you bring order from chaos. You go out, people call you. When they dial 911, they know you're on the way to fix that. That's all they care about. They don't care what's going on in your life. They don't care what's going on at the department. They don't care about anything else. All they know is when I dial those 3 numbers, I want emergency services to come fix whatever it is I'm dealing with. And you do that. You do that every single day, and you do it amazingly well all the time. I know that there's approximately 55,000 firefighters in the state of Ohio from the statistics I've been given. And, you think every year the number of calls they go on. Matt and I were talking yesterday, and just as we talked on the phone, he got a call of a medical run, and he was doing dual duty yesterday. Matt immediately says, I'll call you back. I said, understood. He immediately headed out and called me back a few minutes later, and they were canceled. It was a false call. Didn't matter. He was ready to go. And that's what you guys do. If that person needed help, the Akron Fire Department was en route to provide that assistance. That's what you do. When you're on an airplane, and if you haven't flown for a while, but the last time you flew, they give the big safety briefing at the beginning because they have to. But everybody pays no attention to that because we all know how to put a seatbelt together, and we all know that the exits are located here, here, and here. But part of that safety briefing is in the event of an emergency, an oxygen mask is going to fall from the ceiling. Please put yours on before you attempt to help anybody else. And they say that because if you're not in the fight, if you're incapacitated, if you can't help others, you're no help. One of the reasons they come to people who sit on the exit aisles, and they picked it because they want more leg room or they don't want somebody sitting right in their lap. And they'll say, are you able and capable and willing to assist in the event of an emergency? And hopefully those people who are not willing, are not capable, are not able to help that, are honest enough to go, well, no, that really isn't me. Great, no problem, that's fine. Let's get some, let's find you a good seat. We'll get somebody up here who can. Because in the event of an emergency, they're depending on that person. We depend on you. If I call 911 this evening, I depend on the Grove City Police Department and the Jackson Township Fire Department to be here immediately and to fix whatever it is I need them to do. If they're not capable, if they're not taking care of themselves physically, mentally, emotionally, they're not going to be ready to help me, and I need them to be ready to help me. Here's my contact information, folks. Again, I can be reached here at any of this information. I can also be reached through the academy. The superintendent has my information, deputy superintendent, the folks in the training division, Heidi, Dan, and Jay, and those folks that we've been working with all have my contact information. I'll leave it up here for just a second because I like to finish up with what I call the whole story. And the whole story goes like this. There was a firefighter, and she was standing in a hole. And as she's standing in the hole, she's looking around, and a gentleman walks by, and he says, ma'am, what are you doing? She goes, well, as you can see, I'm stuck in a hole here. He thinks for a minute, and he takes out a prescription pad, and he writes a script, and he tosses it down in the hole with her, and he walks away. She goes, thanks, helpful, appreciate that. Pretty soon a woman walks by and she says, you know, what are you doing down there? And she goes, well, ma'am, as you can see, I'm stuck in this hole. And the woman thinks for a minute, she closes her eyes and she folds her hands and she says a prayer, and then she walks away. And again, the firefighter goes, wow, thanks, helpful, appreciate that. Didn't get me out of the hole. Pretty soon another firefighter walks by and he looks down in the hole and goes, knucklehead, what are you doing? And she goes, are you blind or something? I'm stuck down in this hole. He thinks for a minute and he jumps down in the hole with her. She screams, oh my gosh, why did you do that? Now we're both stuck down here. He says, because I've been here before and I know the way out. It's not about your agency taking care of you. It's not about me taking care of you, Matt, Dr. Chard. It's not about any of that. It's about people in your agency taking care of each other. It's about you looking out for your coworkers as hard as you look out for the community. It's making sure that you're taking care of your family. That's who's going to take care of each other. You know, there's a little cartoon that I sometimes put up, and it's Charlie Brown sitting with Snoopy at the end of a dock, and it said, maybe you went through what you went through so you could be there for someone who was going through it now. Take advantage of the things that you folks have done, the experiences you've had, and help other people in your department. Folks, I truly appreciate you spending time with us this afternoon. I have a great relationship with the Academy. We've got a First Responder Summit, Wellness, Self-Care, and Resilience coming up August the 26th. The registration information is available through the Academy. It's going to be a one-day seminar. Dr. Chard's going to be part of it. Lieutenant Askia will again be part of it. We're going to have Lieutenant Matt Parrish from the Columbus Fire Department. We've got a number of great speakers. We're going to talk about families. We're going to talk about a lot of different things. It's going to be a really good day. It's completely free of charge. You'll just be able to log in and spend the day with us, log in and out as you need to. So that's coming up. We've got some training opportunities coming up with the Fire Academy. We've already scheduled out our 2021 training calendar, and you can get that from the Academy. And again, we're really hoping to get back to in-person training. Until then, we're doing this online. We're doing it virtually. Anything I can do to help your individual agencies, I absolutely will. I'll talk to one, I'll talk to 400. If you want to include the police department, please don't forget to include your dispatch folks always. Anybody that we can get to talk to, we absolutely will. I thank you so much for your time today. If there's anything that we can ever do, Lieutenant Askia, Dr. Chard, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll be happy to get you that information. Heidi, Dan, and back to you folks.
Thank you so much, all three of you, for your presentations today. I think it's well received and very much needed in today's climate. So if nobody has any questions, we'll go ahead and stop the recording and let these guys move on with their day. I'm just going to pause for a moment just in case anybody would have any questions. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you, folks. Take care.